The silence that night felt different. Not the comforting quiet of home, but the kind that hums with unspoken tension. I noticed it the moment I stepped through the front door of the house on Maple Avenue. For 3 years, I'd lived here, in the small bedroom off the hall, careful not to step where I wasn't wanted, careful not to disturb the fragile peace my son and his wife called family. But that evening, something had changed. "Evening, Clara?" I said softly as I hung my coat by the door. She didn't turn. She was arranging the table. Forks aligned perfectly, napkins folded into sharp triangles, every movement deliberate and overly graceful, as if she were performing for an audience I couldn't see. "Dinner's almost ready," she said, to the room, not to me. My son, Nathan, sat at the table already. His eyes were fixed on an empty plate, shoulders tense. He looked up briefly, forced a smile, then dropped his gaze again. Before I could sit, the doorbell rang. Clara's entire body shifted. Her posture straightened, her voice brightened, and for the first time that evening, she smiled. "I'll get it," she chirped, nearly gliding to the door. Moments later, cheerful voices filled the hallway. "We made it," a man boomed. "Oh, this place is lovely," a woman gushed. I didn't need to guess who they were. The matching suitcases rolling across the hardwood floor told me everything. Clara's parents, Harold and Evelyn Price. I hadn't been told they were coming. Harold entered with the authority of a man used to being welcomed. Evelyn followed, all perfume and false laughter. "Hope you don't mind us dropping by for a couple of weeks," Harold said, already pulling out the head chair at the table. My son's chair. Nathan didn't protest. "A couple of weeks?" I asked, glancing at him. He looked down, fiddling with his spoon. Clara kissed her parents on both cheeks. "Of course not. You'll stay in the downstairs room. It's perfect for you." My chest tightened. "The downstairs room?" I repeated. "That's my room, Clara." She didn't even look at me. "Well, it's not practical for my parents to climb stairs every day. Mother's knees, you know. There's a guest room upstairs," I offered evenly. Clara slammed her palm on the table. The silverware rattled. "My parents deserve comfort, Leonard. You've had that room long enough." For a moment, I thought Nathan would say something, but he didn't. He just stared at his hands like a boy again, too afraid to meet my eyes. The tension in the room thickened, pressing against my ribs. Then Clara delivered her final blow, her voice sharp and victorious. "Either give them your room, or pack your things and leave." The world seemed to go still. Harold cleared his throat. Evelyn smiled faintly. And Nathan, my son, said nothing. I stood. The scrape of my chair echoed through the silence. "I see," I said quietly. "Excuse me." I walked down the hall toward my small room. Every step sounded heavier than the last. Inside, I closed the door and looked around. My entire life reduced to a bed, a chair, and a few memories in frames. My late wife, Margaret, smiling from a photograph on the dresser. 5 years gone, but her presence still filling every empty corner. I opened the closet, pulled down my old leather suitcase, and began to pack. Not with anger, not even sadness, just precision, shirt after shirt, folded neatly. Socks rolled tight, every motion deliberate. From beyond the door came the muffled sounds of laughter. The Prices settling in, moving furniture, claiming space that wasn't theirs. And in that laughter, something inside me froze solid. Not rage, not pain, something colder, sharper, clarity. 3 years ago, when Nathan's house was on the brink of foreclosure, I had written a check for $160,000 to save it. I'd paid for their wedding, their car, their comfort, everything. And now I was being thrown out of the home I'd helped them keep. When I zipped my suitcase and stood in that small room one last time, I felt no tears, no trembling, only purpose. I stepped into the hallway. Nathan was there, hovering by the kitchen doorway, guilt painted across his face. "Dad, maybe we can talk about this?" he said weakly. I smiled, calm, polite, detached. "No need, son. You've already made your choice." From the kitchen, Clara's voice cut through like a blade. Tell him dinner's in the fridge if he wants it. I walked out. Outside, the February wind bit against my face, cold and clean. I lifted my suitcase, straightened my coat, and started down the path without looking back. That night, as the taxi pulled away, I glanced at the glowing windows of the house I'd saved. They didn't know it yet, but that was the last time they'd ever see me as the man they could discard. Because from that moment, something in me changed forever. A week later, they saw me again. Not in their house, but watching from the window of the office building across the street. That was just the beginning. A week later, on a mild March morning, the curtains across from 112 Maple Avenue fluttered, and for the first time since I'd left, Clara noticed me again. From the second-floor office of a modest real estate firm, I looked down through spotless glass at the house that had once been mine. Coffee in hand, I stood there every morning now, reviewing files, building plans, and occasionally just observing. People like Clara never imagine the quiet ones are planners. They think silence means weakness, but silence can also be strategy. Through the glass, I watched them move through the kitchen. Nathan at the counter, Clara arranging flowers she probably couldn't afford, her parents seated like royalty. The scene looked ordinary, peaceful even, but I knew the rot beneath it. I didn't hate them, not yet. What I felt was colder, calmer, a precise sense of arithmetic justice waiting to balance the books. That week, while they played house, I built the foundation for my next move. Old habits die hard. 40 years in finance had left me with a mind that defaulted to numbers, patterns, leverage. In my small rented office, I opened the leather-bound notebook that had traveled with me since 1982 and began to write, assets/liabilities/leverage. I listed everything: savings accounts, investments, pensions, the 2 rental flats Margaret and I had bought decades ago. Tidy, steady, reliable. Enough to live well without touching principal. Enough to play a long game. By noon, my plan had shape. Before punishing anyone, I would remind them who I was, what I was capable of. Not the meek old man they'd dismissed, but the architect of their comfort. That's when I noticed it, the red for sale sign staked in the lawn directly opposite their driveway. I'd seen it before, back when I lived there, but never cared. Now it pulsed like opportunity itself. That afternoon I called the number. Mapleview Realty. This is Susan. Hello, Susan. I'm interested in the property across from 112 Maple Avenue. Still available, she said brightly. Would you like to see it? Yes, I answered, glancing once more out the window toward my son's home. I'd like to see it today. 2 o'clock. The house smelled faintly of dust and pine cleaner, the scent of absence. Hardwood floors, brick fireplace, faded wallpaper. It was bigger than theirs, better kept beneath the neglect. This front room gets wonderful morning light, Susan said, guiding me toward a broad window that spanned almost the entire wall. I stepped forward and froze. Through that perfect sheet of glass, 30 yards away, stood Clara and Nathan's living room window. From here I could see straight into the space where I'd once eaten dinner, laughed with my son, listened to my wife's old clock ticking on the mantel. The symbolism was exquisite. Susan continued her pitch: square footage, roof age, market value, but I barely heard her. My gaze stayed on that window, and the thought formed cleanly in my mind. I will buy this house. Cash. Fast. Quietly. When Susan asked if I was serious, I smiled. Draw up the paperwork. 650, 10-day close. Her eyebrows rose. That's 35 below asking. It's cash, I said. Tell them they'll sleep better tonight. 3 days later, I owned the property. Renovations began immediately. Fresh paint, new fixtures, floors polished to a warm honey tone. But one room received special attention: the front office. Charcoal walls, gleaming bookshelves, a solid oak desk positioned precisely 3 feet from that window. From that vantage, I could see everything. When the final inspection finished, I moved in with nothing but a suitcase, my laptop, and a single framed photo of Margaret. The movers delivered the desk and leather chair last. I placed them myself, aligning the chair until the view through the glass framed their front door perfectly. That evening, I brewed a pot of coffee and waited. At 8 p.m., their kitchen light came on. Clara appeared first, pouring herself a glass of wine. She turned toward the window and froze. I lifted my cup slowly, deliberately, and gave a small, polite wave. The cup in her hand slipped. I saw the liquid scatter across her blouse as she stumbled back, mouth open in silent shock. Seconds later, Nathan rushed in. She pointed wildly toward me. He followed her gaze, squinting through the glass, his expression melting from confusion to disbelief. I raised my hand again, the same calm gesture. Nathan hesitated, then half-lifted his own before Clara slapped it down. Her fury was visible even across the distance. I smiled faintly and returned to my desk. Let them wonder. That night, I wrote a single sentence in my notebook beneath the word strategy. Phase 1, establish presence. Across the street, their lights flicked off one by one. My own stayed on, illuminating the window like a beacon. They thought I'd been erased. Instead, I had just begun to write the next chapter of their lives. The next morning, a letter left my desk, addressed to the very son who once said nothing. It wasn't angry. It was business. And business, unlike family, keeps records. The morning after that silent standoff, sunlight poured through my new office window, washing the oak desk in gold. Across the street, their curtains were drawn tight. I imagined Clara pacing, whispering theories to Nathan. Why is he here? What does he want? Good. Let them guess. I spent the morning as I had for 40 years, calculating, writing, analyzing. But this time, the spreadsheet wasn't about clients. It was about them. On one side of the ledger, I wrote, given, $160,000, mortgage payoff, $15,000. Wedding, $8,000, car, $43,200. Monthly aid, 36 payments. And on the other side, returned, nothing. Total, $226,200, $250,000. A lifetime of trust, rewarded with an ultimatum. That's when I knew the letter had to be written. Not from anger, but from necessity. People like Clara and Nathan only understand paper and ink. They don't hear pain. They hear legal language. So I called my old attorney, Robert Chin. We'd handled estates and investments together for decades. His voice hadn't changed. Still calm, precise, efficient. Robert, I need a professional letter drafted, I said. A formal demand for repayment. $180,000 originally listed as a loan to my son. Was it written down? No, but my bank records note the payment as a loan. And there are emails from him promising to pay it back. Robert paused. It's valid enough to be taken seriously. It'll rattle them, even if it never reaches court. Good, I said. That's exactly what I want. By afternoon, I had the draft in my inbox. A masterpiece of polite devastation. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Nathan Hill, this is a formal notice regarding the repayment of $180,000 provided by Mr. Leonard Hill, supported by documented transfers and contemporaneous records. Unless an amicable repayment plan is arranged within 10 business days, legal proceedings will commence. I signed the bottom with a steady hand and sealed it in an envelope. When the mail truck rolled down Maple Avenue the next morning, I watched from the window as the carrier stopped in front of their house. The envelope slid through their slot. And just like that, the first move had been made. It didn't take long. By evening, I saw Nathan at the kitchen table, shoulders hunched over a letter he'd clearly read 3 times. Clara snatched it from his hands, her face flushing red. Even from across the street, I could see the rage. She slammed her palm on the table. Nathan reached for her wrist, trying to calm her. Through the glass, their silhouettes danced in a blur of movement and fury. An hour later, my phone vibrated on the desk. Nathan, Dad, please, what are you doing? I stared at the message, thumb hovering over the screen, then typed 2 words. Settling accounts. Across the street, I saw him check his phone, then show it to Clara. Her reaction was exactly as I expected. Disbelief mixed with fear. I returned to my work, smiling faintly. 3 days later, they showed up at my door. The bell rang twice, sharp, impatient. I opened the door to find them both standing there. Nathan looked pale. Clara's eyes were cold and defiant. "May we come in?" Nathan asked. "Of course." I gestured toward the living room. The air between us carried tension so thick it almost had sound. "Coffee?" I offered, already pouring 3 cups. "We're not here for coffee," Clara snapped. "We're here to talk about this." She tossed the letter onto the table like a weapon. "What is this, Leonard? Some kind of joke?" I met her glare calmly. "It's a record of what I'm owed." "You gave us that money," she hissed. "I loaned it," I corrected softly. "You mistook my generosity for obligation." Nathan rubbed his temples. "Dad, please. This isn't necessary. We can fix this." "Then talk to my lawyer," I said, sipping my coffee. "All terms go through him now." Clara's voice rose. "You're suing your own son?" "Business, not emotion," I said. "You of all people should appreciate that distinction." Her face flushed scarlet. "You're pathetic," she spat. "Living alone across the street, watching us like some bitter old man." I smiled faintly. "At least I'm not living off someone else's charity." The silence that followed was deep and cutting. Nathan looked at me, then at her, torn between loyalty and shame. "I think we're done here," I said, finally standing. "Please let yourselves out." They left without another word. Through my window, I watched them cross the street, Clara storming ahead, Nathan trailing behind like a shadow. That night, I opened my notebook again. Phase 2, pressure. The letter was only the beginning. True lessons aren't taught with anger. They're taught with patience, precision, repetition. I poured myself another cup of coffee and turned toward the glowing windows across the street. Clara stood there, framed by the curtains, glaring into the night. I raised my cup in a silent toast. Justice, after all, was a matter of timing. By the next week, the first automatic payment from my account to Nathan's quietly vanished. And that missing $1,200 would begin the fall they never saw coming. Numbers have a rhythm. For decades, mine moved in steady harmony, salary deposits, market dividends, monthly transfers. But on the 1st of April, the rhythm changed. For the first time in 3 years, the automatic payment labeled Nathan Support $1,200 never left my account. One click. Delete, confirm, done. I stared at the refreshed balance on my banking app. Clean, untethered, beautiful. Across the street, the house looked the same, but I knew what would happen soon. A missing deposit seems small at first, like a single screw removed from a bridge. But give it time, and the entire structure starts to creak. By midweek, the creaking had begun. Through my window, I saw Nathan sitting at their kitchen table, papers scattered around him, calculator blinking. He rubbed his forehead, mouthing numbers that no longer added up. Clara stormed back and forth behind him, phone in hand, voice rising with each failed call. Their parents, the Prices, still lounged comfortably in what had once been my room. Harold in his undershirt watching television, Evelyn folding laundry that wasn't hers. Every month they consumed more and contributed nothing. Even parasites eventually make the host aware of its blood loss. That night my phone buzzed. "Nathan, Dad, did you cancel the transfer?" Me, "I did." Nathan, "Why?" Me, "Because it was a gift, not a salary." He didn't reply, but 10 minutes later, I saw their curtains snap shut as if sealing in panic. By Friday, word must have spread through their small circle. I saw Clara in the driveway, phone pressed to her ear, pacing tight circles. She gestured violently, a pantomime of desperation even 30 yards away. Then she threw the phone against the garage door. The sound carried across the street like a gunshot. Later, I'd learn what had happened. Her credit card declined at a restaurant. Public embarrassment. And in her mind, humiliation always required an enemy. The next morning, I brewed coffee and sat at my desk, waiting. The doorbell rang at 9:12 a.m. When I opened the door, Nathan stood there alone this time. His eyes were shadowed, shirt wrinkled, that confident posture long gone. "Dad, we're drowning," he said quietly. Can we talk? I gestured toward the sofa. Of course. He sat, elbows on knees, hands clasped like a man at confession. The legal letter, the payments, everything. We can't handle it. Can we just find a way to make it stop? I studied him. The boy who'd once begged me for help now begged me for mercy. Do you remember? I said evenly. When Clara told me to leave? When she said my room belonged to her parents? His face tightened. I remember. And you said nothing. He swallowed hard. I was trying to keep the peace. No, I said softly. You were trying to stay comfortable. Peace is earned. Comfort is borrowed. He looked up then, eyes wet, voice cracking. I'm sorry, Dad. I should have stopped her. I should have protected you. I know. I set down my cup. And now you have to protect yourself. The payments are gone for good. You'll have to live on what you earn. He nodded slowly. I will. I'll find a way. You always could, I said. You just never had to. He left soon after. Through the window, I watched him cross back to the house. Clara met him at the door, demanding answers, her hands slicing the air. He didn't shout back, he just looked exhausted. The house lights flicked on and off throughout the night, each glow and blackout marking another round of argument. I worked late at my desk, composing an email to Robert Chun confirming the next legal step, the official filing of the claim. I didn't need the money, I needed the pressure. Because pressure, steady and patient, creates diamonds or dust. 2 weeks later, I saw the first visible crack. Nathan canceled their planned vacation, a week in San Diego, non-refundable. The confirmation email glowed on his laptop as he rubbed his temples. Days after, Clara's car appeared in the driveway with a handmade for sale $18,000 sign taped to the window, worth $22,000 easily. Desperation discounts always tell the truth better than words. When the buyer left with the keys, Clara stood alone in the driveway, staring at the empty space. From across the street, I watched her shoulders tremble. The game was unfolding exactly as designed. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote under Phase 2, pressure. Target beginning to fracture. Maintain distance. Observe results. Adjust only when necessary. I set down the pen and looked out through that perfect panoramic window. Their lights glowed against the darkness like fragile lanterns. Justice wasn't noisy. It was methodical. It was quiet enough to hear someone else's world begin to break. But every strategy, no matter how precise, meets the moment when the pieces start to move on their own. And soon, Clara Price Hill would make the first mistake of her life, the one that would turn my lesson into something far more personal. By June, the heat had settled over Maple Avenue like a sentence. The lawns browned, the air shimmered, and the house across the street began to rot from the inside out. It wasn't visible yet. Not in the way termites aren't visible at first, but I could feel it. The soft give in the foundation of their composure. The slow tilt toward collapse. Nathan left early most mornings now, long before sunrise. Sometimes, I'd see him sitting in the car for several minutes before starting the engine. Head bowed, hands motionless on the steering wheel. Clara, on the other hand, had stopped pretending. She paced the porch with the phone pressed to her ear, every call more frantic than the last. She yelled, gestured, then hung up in fury. The Prices, her parents, stayed inside, living their lives like unpaid tenants. I often saw Harold in a bathrobe at noon, holding a beer, watching television loud enough that I could hear the canned laughter through the summer air. 5 months and they still hadn't left. The weight of 4 adults on one collapsing bank account, it was only a matter of time. The day it finally cracked, I almost felt pity. Almost. It was a Thursday morning. I sat at my desk, sorting through some minor consulting work, when the sound of raised voices drifted across the street. I stood, coffee in hand, and stepped closer to the window. In their living room, Nathan faced Harold and Evelyn. His gestures were tight, apologetic, explaining something. Harold's posture stiffened. Evelyn's hand rose to her chest in exaggerated disbelief. Within seconds, Harold's face turned crimson. He shouted something so loudly I could almost hear it through the glass. Then he stormed out of the room, his wife following. An hour later, suitcases appeared. From my window, I watched them load their car. Boxes, bags, pillows, everything they dragged into that house for 5 long months. Clara stood on the porch, arms wrapped around herself, jaw trembling. Nathan stayed in the doorway, expression flat, unblinking. No hugs, no promises, just silence. The car drove off without a backward glance. The moment they were gone, Clara turned on Nathan. Even from across the street, I could see her fury bloom like a storm, pointing, shouting, her voice a ragged thread that carried faintly through the humid air. Nathan tried to respond, calm her, reason with her. Then something in him shifted. His posture changed, straightened. His hands came up, palms outward, no longer pleading but drawing a line. The argument exploded. A lamp fell. The sound of shattering glass echoed across the street. A door slammed so hard it shook the curtains. And then silence again. The kind that doesn't end arguments, only freezes them mid-breath. I stood at my window, staring at the stillness that followed, feeling neither satisfaction nor guilt. This was the math of consequences playing out in real time. The next afternoon, Nathan came to me. No anger this time. No excuses. Just exhaustion. When I opened the door, he looked smaller, the way grief makes people shrink without dying. "Dad," he said quietly, "can we talk?" I nodded and led him inside. He sat where he had before, but his body told a different story. Shoulders slumped, eyes rimmed red, the fight drained out of him. "I'm sorry," he said, the words breaking as they left him. "For everything. For letting her treat you like that. For staying silent." I waited, let him spill it all. "She's angry," he continued, "but she's scared too. We both are. I let things fall apart because I didn't want conflict. And now it's all conflict." His voice cracked. "I should have stood up for you. I should have been your son." For the first time in months, I saw the man I'd raised. Not the obedient husband, not the coward, but the boy who used to ask me how the world worked. "Yes," I said quietly, "you should have." He nodded, tears spilling freely now. "Can we fix this?" he asked. "Can we start again?" "Maybe," I said, "but not with my money." He met my gaze. "I understand. And one more thing," I added, leaning forward. "If Clara wants to make peace, she'll need to do what she's never done. Look me in the eye and apologize." He flinched slightly but nodded. "I'll talk to her." "I'm not interested in rehearsed apologies," I warned. "I want truth. She doesn't have to like me, but she'll respect me." He rose slowly, extended his hand. "Thank you for giving me a chance to make this right." I took it. His grip was firm, the first sign of a spine I'd seen in years. When he left, I watched him cross back through the heat haze, shoulders straighter than before. Clara met him at the door, arms crossed. She said something sharp. He didn't flinch this time. She turned to go, and he reached out, said something that made her stop. The conversation stretched on until the sun dipped low, their figures moving in fragments through the windows. That night, I sat at my desk, my reflection layered over the glowing house across the street. 2 silhouettes stood in the kitchen, hers rigid, his calm. The first real balance I'd seen between them. For the first time in a long while, I let myself breathe. A week later, the doorbell rang again. This time, Nathan wasn't alone. And beside him stood the woman who once ordered me to leave, looking like she'd been dragged there by her own conscience. It was a Tuesday morning in late August when the inevitable happened. The air was already thick with heat, the kind that made Maple Avenue shimmer like a mirage. I was reviewing quarterly reports for a client when movement in the corner of my eye drew my attention. Across the street, Nathan and Clara were walking together. Slowly. His hand was on her arm, not dragging, not forcing, but guiding. Even from 30 yards away, I could tell this was not her idea. They crossed the road, stopped at my driveway. Clara's arms were crossed, jaw tight, every line of her posture screaming resistance. Nathan said something quiet. She shook her head once, twice. Then she closed her eyes, took a long breath, and let him ring the doorbell. When I opened the door, The scene almost felt familiar, except this time, the balance of power had shifted. Nathan's voice was steady. "Dad," he said, "Clara has something to say." For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Her throat worked, jaw flexed. Pride wrestled with necessity right there on her face. Finally, through gritted teeth, she said it. "I'm sorry for how I treated you. It was wrong." The words sounded mechanical, practiced, but they were still words I'd never thought I'd hear. "I accept your apology," I said evenly. Clara blinked. That's it. That's it," I replied. "Come in." They followed me into the living room, where the air smelled faintly of coffee and oak polish. It was the same space they'd entered months ago, but this time it looked different through their eyes. Organized, minimal, quietly powerful. My framed certificates lined one wall. The desk gleamed under the morning light, and through the wide window, their own house stood visible in perfect symmetry. For the first time, Clara seemed to really see it all, the order, the discipline, the success she'd dismissed as old man habits. Nathan sat on the sofa. Clara remained standing, her eyes scanning the room as though searching for flaws she could name to feel superior again. She found none. I poured coffee for all three of us. "I've asked my attorney to prepare dismissal papers," I said, lifting my cup. Nathan looked up, surprise breaking through his fatigue. "You're dropping the case?" "Yes, I'll sign them today." I picked up my phone, dialed Robert Chen's number, and put the call on speaker. "Robert," I said, "file a dismissal on the Hill matter. Today." "Understood," came his calm voice. "Are you sure you want to proceed?" "Completely. Consider it done." I ended the call, set the phone down gently, and said, "It's over." Nathan exhaled, the tension leaving him all at once. "Thank you, Dad." But I wasn't finished. "I need both of you to understand something," I said quietly. "There won't be any more financial help. Not now. Not ever again." Clara's mouth opened, defensive instinct firing, but Nathan touched her arm before she could speak. She froze, her lips pressing into a thin line. After a long pause, she managed, "We understand." "Good," I said. "You're capable people. You'll survive. Probably even thrive. Once you stop expecting life to be a gift." Nathan stood. "Can we visit?" "Sometimes." I studied him for a moment, then nodded slightly. "Perhaps. Let's see how things develop." He extended his hand. I took it. His grip was steady this time, firm, deliberate. "Dad," he said softly, "I'm glad you taught me this, even though it hurt." "Some lessons have to," I replied. They left together. From my office window, I watched them cross the street. They didn't hold hands, but they walked side by side, closer than they had in months. When they reached the porch, Clara hesitated before unlocking the door. Nathan said something that made her stop and glance back toward my house. For a fleeting second, our eyes met through the distance. No anger, no triumph, just quiet recognition. That evening, the neighborhood glowed with the amber calm of sunset. From my desk, I saw their lights come on one by one. Inside my own house, everything was still, peaceful. For the first time since that fateful dinner months ago, I felt something close to contentment. I opened my laptop, typed a brief email to Robert Chun. Subject, Peterson account message. "Robert, I've decided to return to part-time consulting. I have the perfect office for it. Please connect me with Peterson's firm again. Best, Leonard." I pressed send and leaned back in my chair. Through the window, the reflection of my desk overlapped perfectly with the faint silhouette of their house. 2 lives, 2 lessons, mirrored and balanced at last. A week later, as work filled my days again, I'd catch glimpses of them through that same window. 2 smaller figures rebuilding a life without my money. And I realized something. Revenge had ended, but the lesson was still being learned. Peace, I learned, doesn't return with forgiveness. It returns when silence feels natural again. The week after Clara's apology, the rhythm of my days steadied. Mornings began with coffee and the soft hum of my computer. Evenings ended with the warm amber glow of my desk lamp and the quiet pulse of the neighborhood beyond the window. Across the street, the Hill house began to move differently. The lights came on earlier. The shouting stopped. For the first time in months, the curtains stayed open. I saw Nathan fixing the fence one afternoon. Shirt damp with sweat, movements slow but determined. Clara came out with lemonade, handing him a glass without a word. He took it, nodded, and went back to hammering. There was something new in the air around them. Not love, perhaps, but the shared understanding that they'd survived something poisonous together. And from my side of the glass, that was enough. When I returned to consulting, my mind sharpened again. The Peterson account demanded precision, figures, reports, client calls. I spent hours balancing portfolios, rediscovering the part of myself I'd let rust. For years, I'd been more of a father than a professional. But somewhere along the way, fatherhood had turned into financing. Now I was reclaiming what mattered, my time, my dignity, my own story. Robert Chin called one afternoon. "You sound lighter," he said. "I am," I told him, "for the first time in years." "So, how are they?" I looked out the window. "Learning." He laughed softly. "You always did believe in consequences." "I believe in clarity," I corrected. "And they're finally seeing things clearly." Late one evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, Nathan stood there, alone this time. "Evening, Dad," he said. His voice carried something I hadn't heard before. Steadiness. He looked healthier, more focused. "Come in," I said. He sat down, removing his cap, turning it in his hands. "I got a promotion." "Congratulations," I said genuinely. "Clara's found part-time work too," he added. "She's teaching design online. She's good at it." I smiled faintly. "She's clever. Always was. Just misdirected." He nodded. "We both were." He hesitated for a moment, then said quietly, "I wanted to thank you, not for dropping the lawsuit, for everything else." I tilted my head. "Everything else?" "For making me wake up," he said. "For letting me hit the bottom instead of cushioning it." There it was, the sentence every parent dreams of hearing and dreads at the same time. "You did what you had to do," he continued. "And I did too. I let her control everything because it was easier. But when you stopped paying for our comfort, you forced us to start living again." His eyes glistened under the lamplight. "I think Mom would have approved." The mention of her name, Margaret, hit me like a soft echo in the chest. I hadn't heard anyone speak it aloud in so long. I looked away for a moment, then back at him. "She would have liked to see you this way," I said. "Standing on your own." We sat there for a while, just drinking coffee, watching the lights flicker across the street. When he left, the silence that followed didn't feel empty anymore. Felt earned. A few days later, I saw Clara tending to the garden, the one she used to hire landscapers for. She wore gloves now, hair tied back, kneeling in the dirt with focus. At one point, she looked up, noticed me watching, and did something I didn't expect. She waved. It wasn't sarcastic or forced, just a small, genuine gesture. I nodded back. It was the closest thing to peace either of us would ever need. That night, I took out my old leather notebook, the same one that had once held all my revenge plans, and opened it to the last written page. Phase 2, pressure. Below it, in bold ink, I wrote, Phase 3, understanding. And under that, a single sentence. Sometimes you have to break people to rebuild the truth inside them. I closed the notebook for good. Outside, the neighborhood was bathed in the soft orange haze of dusk. Children played somewhere down the block. The smell of fresh-cut grass drifted through the open window. I thought of Margaret then, of how she used to say that love isn't about giving everything, but about giving meaning. And finally, I understood. But life has a way of testing even those who've found peace. And one evening, a letter arrived addressed to me, from a name I hadn't heard in decades, someone who remembered a debt of my own. The letter arrived on a quiet Thursday morning. It was thin, plain, unremarkable, the kind of envelope that usually holds bills or bank statements. But the handwriting stopped me cold. Neat, deliberate script. Familiar in a way that scratched at something buried deep. From the desk of Samuel Carter. I hadn't seen that name in almost 30 years. Samuel had been my business partner in the late 80s, brilliant, ambitious, and reckless in ways I wasn't. When our investment firm collapsed during the market crash, I'd survived. He hadn't. I'd rebuilt. He'd disappeared. But before he vanished, we'd made a deal. One I'd quietly walked away from when things went south. The letter trembled slightly in my hands as I unfolded it. Leonard, I've kept track of you. Saw your name recently in a financial journal, still sharp, still standing. I envy that. I'm writing because I've been diagnosed with something terminal. There's no anger left in me, but before I go, I need you to know something. When the firm failed, I took the blame for numbers we both approved. My silence kept you clean. Maybe you don't remember that part. But I do. You owe me nothing. But if you ever find yourself alone at the end of all this, remember that peace only belongs to those who've made things right. Goodbye, old friend. Samuel. I read it twice, then a third time. The words felt heavy, not like accusation, but like truth. For years I'd carried the narrative that I'd been the victim of betrayal, not the survivor of one. But maybe that was just another comfortable lie, a soft corner I'd built around my guilt. I placed the letter on my desk beside the old notebook. The parallels weren't lost on me. I had become the very thing I'd punished Nathan for being, blind to the debt of grace someone else once paid for me. That evening, I sat on the porch as twilight deepened. Across the street, Nathan's laughter floated faintly through the air, low, genuine. The kind that only comes when the worst is behind you. Clara's voice followed, softer now, shaped by humility rather than pride. They were healing. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for me to do the same. I took out my pen and a clean sheet of paper. Dear Samuel, you were right. I remember more than I've allowed myself to admit. You took the fall for both of us, and I convinced myself you deserved it. You didn't. I've lived my life building walls made of reason and revenge, calling it discipline. But the truth is, I was afraid. Afraid that if I faced what I'd done, everything would crumble. I can't undo what happened then, but I can make peace with it now. If this letter reaches you, know this. I've set aside a trust in your name to fund scholarships for underprivileged students studying finance. It will carry your signature, not mine. You carried my burden once. Let me carry your name forward. Leonard Hill. I sealed the envelope, stamped it, and set it by the door. Whether Samuel would live long enough to read it didn't matter. What mattered was that I'd finally written it. Later that night, I stood once more before the great window, the same one that had framed every stage of my quiet war. Only now there was no tension in the view. No enemies, no targets. Just the hum of life continuing, imperfect but honest. The glow from Nathan's kitchen spilled softly across the street, blending with the light from my own. For the first time, the two homes didn't seem like opposites. They looked connected. I thought of Margaret then, her voice, her patience, her endless belief that people could change if given enough truth and time. Perhaps she'd been right all along. I whispered softly to the glass, as if speaking to her reflection. I've made things right, love, at least, as right as I could. The wind stirred the trees outside, their branches whispering back. I turned off the desk lamp, took one last look across the street, and closed the curtains. Not out of bitterness this time, but because the story was done. The accounts had been settled, the debts repaid, the lessons learned. And as I walked to my bedroom, the silence followed me. Not heavy and haunted as before, but peaceful, earned, alive. Months later, after the world had gone still again, another envelope arrived. This time with no name, no address, only 5 words written across the front. You were forgiven long ago. Autumn crept into Maple Avenue without ceremony. The trees turned gold, the air sharpened, and the mornings grew soft with mist. Life had fallen back into its rhythm, deliberate, calm, almost gentle. Work slowed down. My evenings became rituals of tea and silence. Sometimes, I'd sit by the window with an old record playing, watching the neighborhood settle under the orange glow of the streetlights. Peace had come, not as an apology but as understanding. Then, one afternoon, the mail slipped through the slot with a faint thud. Bills, catalogs, and one envelope with no return address. Cream-colored, heavy paper. On the front, 5 handwritten words. You were forgiven long ago. For a long time I didn't move. The envelope rested in my hands, light as dust, but my pulse quickened as though it carried the weight of years. The handwriting wasn't Samuel's, too neat, too steady, but it carried the same restraint, the same elegance. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded once. Leonard, Samuel passed away peacefully 2 weeks ago. I found your letter among his things. He'd already written this note before he went into the hospital, asking that it be sent to you upon his death. He spoke kindly of you, said you were the only man who ever made him believe the numbers mattered less than the people behind them. He wanted you to know he held no anger. His exact words were, "Tell Leonard he was forgiven long ago. I thought you should know. Abigail Carter." I stared at the signature until it blurred. The old ache. The one I'd buried under pride, under logic, under layers of self-made justification, rose quietly, without rage or regret. Forgiven. The word felt foreign, like hearing your own name in a language you forgot you once spoke. That night I couldn't sleep. I made tea, walked to the window, and watched the faint mist crawling along the asphalt. Across the street, the Hill house was alive again. Nathan was painting the porch railing. Clara hung fairy lights along the edge, laughing softly. I remembered the nights when anger had filled that space instead. Shouting, broken glass, silent meals. Now there was laughter, restoration. The sound drifted across the cool air, not sharp or mocking, just human. And for the first time I understood something simple and profound. All the revenge, all the precision, all the carefully crafted pain. It hadn't been about them. It had been about me. About refusing to see that forgiveness was the only currency that could ever balance a life. In the weeks that followed, I made changes. Small ones, quiet ones. I sold the extra property I'd been holding as an investment. Donated the proceeds to a charity that funded housing for seniors. The kind of people who, like me once, had nowhere to go when family closed the door. I sent a letter to Nathan and Clara. Not long, not dramatic. Just truth. To my son and daughter-in-law, if one day you find yourselves guiding your own children through mistakes and pride, remember this. The point of family is not obedience. It's continuity. We fail each other so that we may teach each other. I'm proud of what you've become, Dad. Nathan replied a week later, "Thank you, Dad. We read it together." Clara cried, "We're trying to be better, for each other and for you. Dinner's waiting whenever you're ready." I didn't go right away. Some invitations are meant to linger a while, like open doors at dusk. Winter came softly. Snow layered the roofs. The world fell quiet, and the air outside smelled of frost and pine. I spent Christmas Eve alone, but it didn't feel lonely. The candlelight glowed on Samuel's letter, now framed on the wall above my desk. Below it, my old notebook sat closed. Its pages a record of every mistake, every strategy, every lesson learned the hard way. I no longer needed to write in it. Through the window, the Hill house shimmered with lights, laughter, warmth, movement. And for a moment, as I sipped my tea, I could have sworn I saw Margaret's reflection beside mine in the glass, smiling. Life, like numbers, only balances when both sides are seen. I spent years counting debts. Now, for once, I saw the other side, the quiet ledger of mercy, the forgiveness freely given when none was earned. I turned off the lamp, letting the darkness fill the room like a lullaby. Outside, snow fell in soft spirals, covering everything equally. Old grudges, new beginnings, and the house across the street that once divided us. And in that stillness, I finally felt what Samuel had meant. Peace wasn't payment. It was closure. Months later, when the thaw came, I'd walk across Maple Avenue for the first time since I left. And on that visit, the last chapter of my life, I'd leave behind the only thing that truly mattered, the truth of who I had become. Beautiful. We've arrived at the grand finale, the moment where every quiet act, every lesson, every scar leads to peace. Spring arrived like a quiet apology. The snow melted into thin silver streams along the gutters of Maple Avenue, and for the first time in years, the air smelled of life again. Rain, earth, renewal. I spent my mornings by the window, coffee in hand, watching the world rebuild itself. Nathan had repainted their shutters. Clara had planted rosebushes along the fence. The transformation was subtle but steady, one careful act of living after another. It was time. On a soft Sunday afternoon, I crossed the street. The pavement was warm beneath my shoes, the wind mild against my coat. Each step carried an echo of memories. The day I'd left, suitcase in hand, silence biting harder than the February cold. When I reached their porch, I paused. The door that had once been shut in my face now stood half open, the sound of laughter spilling from within. Nathan appeared first. His face broke into a smile that didn't look practiced this time. "Dad," he said, as if the word had just returned to his vocabulary. "Come in." I stepped inside. The house looked different, simpler. The heavy decorations were gone, replaced with framed photos and plants. The air was lighter, no tension hiding in corners, no hostility woven into the walls. Clara entered from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. Her eyes met mine, steady, not defiant, not ashamed. "Coffee?" she asked. I smiled faintly. "Always." She poured me a cup and sat across the table, her posture careful, her tone soft. "We're doing better," she said. "It's not perfect, but we're trying." "That's all life ever asks," I replied. Nathan nodded. "You were right about everything, Dad. About what we owed you. Not the money, but the respect." I looked around the room, noticing the small signs of effort. A mended chair leg, a shelf built by hand, the absence of extravagance. "You've done well," I said quietly. "Your mother would be proud." The mention of Margaret made the silence deepen for a moment. Then Clara said something that surprised me. "She's the one who made me realize what I'd done." I looked up sharply. "Margaret?" Clara nodded. "I dreamt of her, more than once. She never spoke, just looked at me. It was unsettling, but I understood." Her eyes glistened. "I used to think strength meant control. She showed me that strength is restraint." For a moment, I couldn't find words. The ache that followed was almost sweet, like grief softened by time. After dinner, Nathan led me to the small study they'd turned into an office. He handed me a folder. "What's this?" I asked. "Our first savings portfolio," he said. "We're learning to manage our own future now, without help." I flipped through the pages, the numbers small but honest. He was building something real this time. "Well done," I said. "Keep your debts light and your heart lighter." He smiled. "That's something you'd write in your notebook." I chuckled softly. "It's already in there." When I stood to leave, the sky had dimmed into lavender twilight. Clara walked me to the door. "Leonard," she said quietly, "thank you for not giving up on him, or on me." I met her eyes. "You earned that thanks yourself. Keep it." She nodded, and for the first time, her smile didn't look rehearsed. As I stepped onto the porch, Nathan called after me. "Come for dinner next Sunday?" I turned, smiling. "I will." And for the first time in years, I meant it. Crossing back to my house, I felt the years between us finally collapse into stillness. The sun slid low behind the rooftops, casting long shadows that seemed to merge both our homes into one. Inside, I placed my coat on the hook and walked to the great window. The same window that had once framed my anger, my vengeance, my solitude. Now it reflected something else entirely. Peace. On the desk lay my old notebook. I opened it to the last page, the one titled, Phase 3 Understanding. Beneath it, I added one final line in neat, steady handwriting. Final entry, the balance sheet. Assets. Time. Forgiveness. Family. Liabilities. Pride. Silence. Regret. Net worth, peace. I closed the cover, slipped the notebook into a drawer, and turned off the lamp. As the room fell into soft darkness, I looked once more toward the house across the street. Nathan and Clara stood by their window, lights warm behind them. She leaned her head on his shoulder. He looked up, saw me, and lifted a hand in quiet greeting. I raised mine in return. It was the same gesture I'd made all those months ago when this story began. But now it meant something entirely different. Not defiance, not warning, just acknowledgement, connection, home. Outside, night settled gently over Maple Avenue. The wind carried the faint scent of rain, and the world felt perfectly balanced, like a ledger finally reconciled. And as I sat there, alone but never lonely, I realized something simple, something true. Every story of revenge eventually becomes a story of forgiveness, if you live long enough to learn the difference.